Welcome to Student-Led Developer Built, a new model for EdTech Solutions co-design. This is, as I mentioned, the third and final session in our free Collaborative by Design summer series hosted by Collaborative Innovation Studio at Digital Promise. My name is Sharina Bates, and I will be your host today. So here's what you can expect for today. We're first going to start with some framing, and this is what we've done with every webinar we've hosted in this series, framing up co-design, collaborative innovation as a framework. We'll talk about also how it is that you integrate student voice in the process of co-design. We'll show some real life examples of ways that students showed up, not only by elevating and amplifying their voice, but also by really informing teaching and learning solutions. So, of course, we'll make time for questions in our closing. And before we leave today, I'll share with you a very special opportunity that we are inviting EdTech solution teams to be a part of for our Summer School 2026. So let's dive right in. Well, we'll kick things off with who we are. Quick context before we get started with everything else. Digital Promise is a global nonprofit working to expand opportunity for every learner. And so we work at the intersection of research, practice, and technology with a particular focus on communities that have historically been excluded. So that's who we are. And I want to share with you the Collaborative Innovation Studio centered in Digital Promise, one of our initiatives. We focus specifically on co-design and co-research between EdTech developers and the districts and students they serve. And that's the work we're here to talk about today. On the screen, you'll see the amazing engine behind the Collaborative Innovation Studio. Again, I'm your host, Sharina Bates, but I want you to see the faces of the people who really carry the load in this work that we do. All right, so this is what you will walk away from today. You are going to see why traditional student engagement sometimes misses the mark. We'll dive in a little bit and talk more in detail about that. And then you'll learn how centering student voice and student leadership really helps to amplify teaching and learning solutions. And so I'm really excited about the content today. But first, I want to hear from you all in the room. A quick read, a quick poll. If you could drop in the chat A, B, C, or D, responding to this prompt that's on the screen. What ways has your team engaged students in a formal or informal way? What ways has your team engaged students in a formal or informal way? And by the way, this is a safe space. So A, B, C, or D, we'd just love to know where your team is. Maybe surveys, feedback forms, student focus groups, advisory councils, informational conversations or check-ins, hallway chats, office visits, maybe even events, or perhaps you haven't intentionally engaged students just yet. Maybe you're getting started, and that's okay too. So let me see what the chat is. Okay, we have A, B, and C. Nice. A, B, and C, A and B, very, very good. So we have some folks in the room who have done some work around student voice. I love to hear that, and hopefully, what it is that you all gain from today's session will help to add to the way that you've been thinking about engaging with students. Thank you so much for responding. And I did not mention this, but please feel free to drop any questions that you might have in the chat, or there is a Q&A function that we'll use later at the close of our session. So any questions you have, I would love to respond to those whole group because there may be others on the line who have similar questions. All right. So quick framing, I mentioned that we share this in every webinar so that we are all working from the same definition. Co-design. What is co-design? And in terms of collaborative innovation, how do we define it? Well, we say that co-design is a process where different stakeholders come together to find a solution to a shared problem. And this happens through collaborative research and development. And I really do want to pull a few words from this definition because it's easy to hear co-design and think maybe that means letting users submit feature requests, or maybe I do user testing at the very end of my development, but that's not quite it. In collaborative innovation co-design, the different stakeholders, not just the internal team, and not really just your most engaged users, but you inquire feedback from different stakeholders, the people who may be difficult to reach, maybe are closest to the challenge, but definitely most impacted by the solution that you will design. And so it's a shared problem, not necessarily a product road map, right? But you engage learners, students, communities, districts around needs that they have, maybe contextualize problems that they have, and then you work together to co-create, co-design a solution that best meets that need. And you've heard me mention collaborative innovation, and this is the model that we anchor our co-design in. Now, on the screen, you'll see 6 tenets. I won't read all of these to you, but I will highlight them later in the session where you see them come to life in some actionable ways. Co-design is our model where we focus on 4 practice tenets and 2 impact tenets. And they really help to drive the way that we co-design with EdTech solution providers and engage them and partner them with districts. So again, we'll hear more about that in just a moment, but I just wanted to frame this for you. So when we talk about earning district trust and the co-design priorities, if we're going to design solutions that best meet the needs of districts, if we are going to, based off of the very contextualized needs that districts have, right? Very diverse needs. If we're going to do that, we first obviously have to earn their trust. And we do that by centering 3 co-design practices. The first is around prioritizing relationships. This really means that the co-designers have to share a meaningful relationship based on trust, based on respect, and really working together to solve problems. The second anchor is capacity building, and this says that everyone has something to teach and everyone has something to learn. And so everyone in the room at some point will be a learner and everyone will be a listener. And then the last priority that we really focus on is shared contribution and benefit. And this says that everyone's ideas, they're considered throughout the entire process. So we don't wait until the very end to get feedback. We're mindful and intentional about iterating, designing, implementing, monitoring, evaluating on a regular basis. So why does collaborative innovation co-design matter? Well, it's not a one size fits all approach. And we talked about that. If you joined us at our first webinar, we talked about the fit feature, fitting with the district, your solution, your tool, your model. And we really emphasize that it cannot be a one size fits all approach because co-design centers the local context and the lived experiences of the tool, right? Those who are going to shape the tool, those who the tool or the product will be used for, or rather who will be using the tool. It has to be local context that matters. And here are some 3 ways. Districts lead the way by surfacing real challenges and priorities, ensuring solutions are responsive to their unique context. Another is that providers and EdTech partners adapt their tools and services in direct response to district needs, building functionality that works in practice, not just in theory. And lastly, students, families, and educators contribute their perspectives, grounding every decision in the realities of those closest to the classroom. And so, what does this mean? Well, it means that districts lead the way. They surface real challenges and priorities. They're not validating a roadmap, but they're really naming what it is that they need. It also means that providers adapt, adjust their tools and services in response to what the district surfaces. So you're building functionality that works in practice, not just in theory. And then lastly, it means that students, families, and educators contribute. They contribute their perspectives, and it's grounded in every decision, right? So whatever it is that you have laid out in your roadmap, you consider the context expertise of those stakeholders. And so that is co-design, and this is what it means for districts. I want to share with you this idea around the traditional student engagement, right? And how if we don't intentionally engage student voice, that we could miss the mark as we're designing tools, as we're designing these products. Why is it that we struggle to amplify student voices effectively? This is a question that I've heard developer teams ask very indirectly, sometimes even, because sometimes for teams, student voice means we built the product, we designed the product or the tool, we give it to teachers to implement, and then we ask, how did it work? Did it succeed, right? But that is not amplifying student voices, at least not effectively. So why is it that we struggle to do that? Well, maybe we see students as recipients and not co-creators of their own education. Maybe there's an illusion of student consultation, maybe without actual decision-making authority. Perhaps there are systemic barriers that exist that really just are in the way of getting authentic communication. Or it could be the idea of power dynamics in traditional student engagement models, right? The adult in the room appears to have more say, more voice in the way things happen. However, there's a cost. There is a cost of not listening to the communities who have that contextual expertise. And here are just some ways that we have to count up the cost. It could be disengagement, right? Missed opportunities for innovation, failed solutions, maybe watered down resources. And then investing in solutions that don't address actual student community needs and priorities. We talked about that a little bit briefly in our first webinar as well. And so that is recorded if you'd like to refer and go back to that. So again, this idea of amplifying student voice is critical if we're going to have a right fit between an ed tech developer and a school district. So let's talk about integrating student voice. On the screen are key elements for integrating student voice. And so I'll name all of these for you and just kind of highlight them. But I want you to think about maybe what it is that your team has done to integrate student voice. Have you done the foundation building, maybe the iterative design, maybe the sustainability planning? These are three components that really help to integrate student voice. The first around foundation building, this is leadership structures that share contributions with students. So that means students as decision makers, students helping to interpret data, which is traditionally, we talked about that traditional way of student voice. That's traditionally an adult facing task. It also means resource allocation that demonstrates commitment, something as simple as a stipend for student participation, or maybe an incentive like a gift card. It means clear agreements about decision-making authority. One method that we have used in our work is dot voting, and you might be familiar with that. However, in our case, because we believe that the contributions of students really matter, we give students weighted votes. And so they have three times as more weight with the vote than the adult votes, right? In practice, this looks like the adult gets one dot, but the student gets three dots to be able to vote in a given project. The second is initiative design. So student-led problem identification, collaborative solution development, implementation plans that include student oversight and not just their input. And this could look different depending on the context of your organization, the context of the tool that you're designing, the product that you're designing. But either way, you are allowing the student to have some type of leadership component. And then lastly, sustainability planning, knowledge transfer process, institutional commitment that outlasts the initial project, and then leadership transition strategies. So this doesn't depend on, one student or one cohort. And I'll share more about that later where we talk about the transfer of knowledge. But sustainability planning is critical when we're talking about amplifying student voice. And I want to remind everyone that the chat is open, so feel free to drop any questions or comments, and we will definitely respond to them at the end of the session. And so, a student centered approach built on those six core tenets is what I want to share with you. I showed you that image earlier of how collaborative innovation really frames the work of co design using those core tenets. But now I want to really break them down one by one so that we see how students can co construct solutions that transform educational experiences. Let's first look at co-leading with students, and that is the collective ownership tenet. This is where the work is co-led, it's co-researched, and it's co-designed by students, by those collaborators who are reflective of the diversity of communities of schools to make sure the benefit runs both ways. And so in practice, it looks like this: students as voting members in decision-making bodies, shared authority in how an initiative is designed and implemented, students as paid consultants and researchers, not just volunteers, and transparent credit for what students actually contribute. The second tenet, student voice and leadership. Now, this is where students, again, are collaborators and their perspectives are prioritized in creating solutions to the challenge that affect them. And here's what it means in practice. Youth-led needs assessments and problem identification. So they are working in collaboration with your design team to identify a problem in order to design a solution. Student developed evaluation criteria, processes designed around student schedules and preferences, not adult convenience, and multiple formats for input because not every student communicates the same way. Let's take a look at our next tenet, which is context, expertise, and proximity, one of my favorites. This is where students and communities, they know the context of their district. They know the context of their classroom. They know the context of the culture within the building and across the campuses. And so they have this lived experience that they can bring to designing solution, this valuable insight that they can bring to help shift the ideas around a solution or a tool. And so in practice, it looks like recognizing students as experts in their own educational experience. It also validates students' narratives and legitimate data, not anecdotes, prioritizing the perspectives of those most impacted by educational inequities, and then building initiatives around what students actually say they need, not what adults assume they need. Let's take a look at our next tenet, shared contributions and benefits. And this is addressing that systemic barrier to student leadership. And so, deeply integrated in research and design practices, there is this need to address the intersections and conditions that impact students, right? And so, I mentioned earlier that a tool, a product, it cannot be a one size fits all approach. And so, in practice, what this looks like is analyzing which students have traditionally been excluded from leadership, creating multiple pathways to participation that address systemic barriers, making sure resources support sustained engagement, things like transportation and stipends, and building structures that outlast any individual student's participation. And so that really also connects back to sustainability. And then reimagining progress, student defined success metrics. Progress measures have to be multidimensional. I know you know that. And so, because they capture access, participation, and the benefit of the students most impacted, not just the easiest number to report, we have to be transparent in this reimagining progress as well as accountable. And so we mentioned, I believe it was in the second webinar, the accountability and the transparency really falls onto what we call an improvement tracker. And this is where once we've captured the feedback from students or leaders, but in this case, students, we assign an action to that, whether or not the feedback can be used, if it can or cannot, and communicating back to the students who shared the feedback why or why not it was implemented. So reimagining progress is really critical because when students feel seen, valued, and heard, they are more likely to continue to contribute their expertise. So in practice, here's what it looks like. Students co-creating the measurement frameworks themselves, defining impact beyond traditional academic metrics, regular student-led reflection on whether the initiative is actually working, and valuing qualitative student experience alongside the quantitative outcomes. And then the last tenet, building capacity, developing student leadership ecosystems. The process has to resource communities to sustain this capacity for research and development long term. It's not just a one-off, check the box activity. Building capacity is iterative. And so in practice, it looks like student to student mentorship, acknowledge transfer. It looks like leadership skill development being built into the initiative itself. Students stepping into roles as trainers, as facilitators, and documenting the process so future student cohorts can build on the work instead of starting over. So those are our six core tenets. And so now I want us to look at what it actually looks like when it's running in real time. I'm excited to introduce to you all the League of Innovative Students. This is a initiative near and dear to my heart because we've worked with them about 4.5 years now. And this is Youth Voice and Leadership at the Center, Collaborative Innovation in Action. The League of Innovative Students is an amazing cohort opportunity for secondary school students to collaborate directly with district leaders, education policymakers, educational technology developers, and researchers in designing student-centered solutions. And students have participated in a series of opportunities, including presenting research at the National Center for Inclusive Innovation convening, co-authoring blogs, and serving as panelists on EdWeb webinars. Um, I'm excited because I have a video that I'm going to pull up, but you'll see those tenets that I just shared with you, how they come to life. So we talked about capacity building for students, students sitting at the table of leadership. LOIS, we affectionately call League of Innovative Students LOIS. LOIS really prepares students to be drivers of their education, drivers as leaders, and it really paints the picture for what amplifying student voice and student leadership looks like. So, without further ado, I could say more, but I would let them speak for themselves. Let's take a look. Oh, before we take a look, let me share this with you. The collaborative innovation in action. So, really quickly, just highlights three projects where student voice and student co-led ideas really came to life. The first was in Bristol Township, and this is where students collaborated with mental health professionals to create training for teachers to better support students facing mental health challenges. The second was in Talladega County, where students, families, and community organizations co-designed career pathways that are now transforming opportunities for students in rural districts. And then lastly, in Seattle, principals and students co-analyzed discipline data together and created strategies for reducing chronic absenteeism and suspension. So again, three very different contexts. We talked about the contextual needs of districts, three very different problems, but in every case, students weren't just consulted, they were in the room doing the work. All right, so LOIS student-centered engagements. I want to highlight really briefly because there's a lot of text on this slide, but again, you'll have access to the recording. The goal, again, building capacity, we talked about that. And students do this in LOIS through research and human-centered co-design skills. The second goal in LOIS is around students authentically collaborating with adults. And so in our ed tech track, students have applied their skills by collaborating with adult professionals in ed tech development industry and co-creating solutions. And then in our other track, research challenges, students have applied their research knowledge and skills working alongside adults in servicing challenges faced by their peers. And the third goal is informing the development of solutions and products. And so I'll share with you in just a moment how that has come to life. But students and adult participants pilot student feedback loops developed by LOIS cohorts and ed tech companies. Design and redesign their solutions based off of student feedback loop input. And again, two projects to highlight what it is that the league has done very recently. But let's get to the good part. And please, if you cannot hear the sound, I'm gonna open up the chat real quick, just in case. I think we'll be good, but just in case.
We're at the Center for Inclusive Innovation convening at Washington, D.C. And today I'll be talking about the research I did, which was focused on student admin communication.
I wanted to investigate a relationship that's so crucial in furthering every student's education.
The League of Innovative Students is a group of students from across the U.S. and what we do is we help address problems in education based on what we're seeing in our district.
Being part of the League of Innovative Students, I've learned so much. The research and design process and how to create conversations that will hopefully lead to the change you want to see.
The League of Innovative Students is that place where you can be like, hey, I have this thought or I have this idea. See like people listening to my research and feel like they're actually like trying to bring change based off of my research. Like I feel like the main character, right? My presentation, yes.
Just working with other students on this nationwide level and of course with Digital Promise, we have the opportunity to really make sure that our voices are heard because we're the ones, the stakeholders, the ones who are being affected by all of our district's policies.
I want to be able to say that we've truly made education inclusive and innovative like this conference hopes to make it, because it does take time to make the progress that we're all talking about happen, but I think if we put the effort in and we incorporate things like more student voice, then it could definitely happen.
I absolutely love that video because I mentioned I've worked with our league students almost 5 years now, and every year they just get more and more. They already started off amazing, but every year they get more and more amazing. And I love this video because it really helps to showcase how student-centered leadership and amplifying student voice really not only means so much to the teaching and learning tools that are created, but really their ecosystem of learning. And so I hope you enjoyed that video. I want to share a quote with you. And I think this quote is really insightful because when we talk about solution providers, ed tech teams coming in to do the work and partner with districts, sometimes there can be a barrier in communication, a barrier in what they imagine the experience should look like. And so the next screen really demonstrates the mindset shift of an ed tech provider that we worked with very recently. And I want to read this for you. When I first truly engaged in the practice of intergenerational co-design, adults and kids were getting on the floor together with clay, markers, giant sheets of paper, and sometimes digital tools, though most often not. You're bringing these wonderful ideas in as product developers, as germs or seeds. And those things you bring in, you kind of have to throw them out the window. It's messy. You might learn uncomfortable truths about this precious idea that you've had. And I love that. I love being stressed. I love embracing the brilliance of youth, letting them have a voice in the products they're going to use and really valuing and honoring that. So I think 100% we have benefited from that practice and we do it regularly. Now, this is really critical because when we invite EdTech teams in, we really frame up this idea of collaborative innovation, this co-design framework that you are going to be teaching and learning with district leaders, with students, and we hyper focus and prioritize student voice in the initiative process, as well as asking the EdTech teams to really take another look at their roadmap and see where there might be inroads or opportunities to bring in student voice where maybe they had not considered before. So, my favorite line out of this quote is that you might learn uncomfortable truths about this precious idea you've had. And that means that the EdTech teams have to become agile. They have to become flexible in thinking that while this maybe was the original idea we had based off of the needs of the district, what we have heard from students, it looks like we need to take another approach. And so I love that transparency there. So now we've arrived at blueprinting for student-led initiatives. We're getting close to the end, so I want to remind you that you can drop your questions in the chat or use the chat, the question feature, and we'll be sure to get to your questions before we close today. So in terms of utility, Sharina, you've shared a lot about amplifying student voice, student-centered, student-led ed tech tools. What is it that I can do today? If I walked into my Scrum meeting tomorrow, if I walked into a temperature check with the district team tomorrow, what is it that I could do to start integrating student voice, student leadership more intentionally? Well, I got 6 steps for you. The first is that you can start with student identified priorities. So, not just the predetermined agenda, you obviously need a plan, but being open, being flexible to hearing what it is that students at the table or district leaders need. The second is you could create transparent decision-making criteria and processes. You heard me mention earlier the improvement tracker, and this has absolutely been an amazing tool that we designed for EdTech teams to use because you're able to provide transparency around decision making that happens and why or why not. Again, it's okay if feedback was not able to be integrated, but communicating that back to the stakeholders who shared the feedback is really critical. It shows not only that you value their context and content expertise, but that you are serious about the partnership and co-designing the solution with them. And so another thing you can do is establish clear parameters for non-negotiables versus student authority. We recognize that there is a level of structure that has to exist, right? And so not to discredit that, but being open to understanding that because everyone has something to teach and everyone has something to learn, that includes students as well. Think about ways that they can elevate their experiences, their classroom culture. What is it that they can teach that can help inform the way that you are designing, shifting, iterating on your product or tool? Another is developing adult ally training to support power sharing. One of the things that we do, and when I get to the summer school invitation at the end, I would love for you to sign up for that. But one of the things that we do that if you were to participate in summer school, you learn more about is this idea of a champion in a district. And so we recognize that every district, because it's different, maybe the IT person is the right person, or maybe it's the partnerships coordinator that you should go to, or maybe, and possibly you felt like you just kind of got the runaround because nobody has directed you to the right point person. We talk about this idea of the adult champion. This is the one who is really helping to drive the vision around the work, the partnership work that you're doing with the district and the students. And they are your single point of contact for questions, information sharing, knowledge sharing. So anyway, more to come on that. Another thing is implementing accountability measures for honoring student input. We talked about potentially incentives, gift cards, stipends, and to be quite honest, believe it or not, even a certificate of participation has been recognized as one mode of appreciation that students flag. So it doesn't always have to have a dollar sign on it, just acknowledging their contributions They're grateful for it. And then lastly, allocating resources, that time, the money, the space to demonstrate that commitment. And that could look different again, across the district, across the team, across the engagement, depending on which phase of the cycle you're in, but allocating the appropriate resources to demonstrate that commitment. Oh, there we go. Okay, so as we close, um, student-led developer build. Here's what I want you to walk away with today. I want to bring it full circle to say that when students lead authentic change, here is what we've seen happen. School culture shift toward collaborative problem solving. Innovative solutions emerge that adults alone wouldn't have conceived. Students develop leadership skills applicable beyond school context. You heard that mentioned in the video from the LOIS students. And institutional practices begin to shift toward more inclusive decision-making structures. So if you don't leave with anything else today, as we close, know that student voice, student leadership is such a necessary part of designing tools and designing products that if you don't hear from them, can we say that we are meeting the need the way that we want to? I'll leave it there and I'll invite you to share any questions. Let me find the chat so I can. Okay. If you give me just a second, I want to read through this to make sure. It looks like we have a question. Okay. Okay, so there's a question here that says, how would you answer a leader who, when challenged to add student voice to this process, says, I'm not letting some 14-year-old tell me how to run my school? This is an amazing question. And unfortunately, we still have leaders who are in process of that mindset shift. And so the first thing that I would do is I would focus on the student context. I would name that students have a level of expertise. They are in the classroom daily. They know the culture of their building. They know the culture of the campus. They know the culture of the district, particularly if they are highly engaged in other activities, extracurricular type activities. So they have this perspective of the classroom and the perspective of teaching and learning that oftentimes adult leaders do not have. And so I would first really elevate them as experts. And I wouldn't water that down at all because they truly are. The second thing that I would do is invite a leader to do just a pilot opportunity because sometimes leaders resist in going all in because they don't know what the outcome would be. And we can respect that. So I would invite them to a pilot opportunity around co-design and what that could look like and make the metrics really manageable, right? You don't want to overshoot because you may not have a whole lot of time to iterate and do that rapid cycle. And so those are two things that I would really prioritize. And then I would build the case around at the end. And this is something that we always do. We always do this. We call it a meaning making session where we invite all of the stakeholders back, the students, the district champions, the community members, if they were a part of the initiative. And we ask them to share where they have seen themselves grow and what it is that they felt was a value add in terms of feeling seen, valued, and heard. And I promise you, if you do that, that meaning making circle has sometimes has brought people just hearts open because they've been able to hear directly from students how being a part of something so amazing helped to contribute to their confidence, the way that they showed up in the classroom. And again, it goes back to creating these lessons that are applicable beyond school. So that's where I would start. Let's see, we have some other questions. Okay, here's another question, and forgive me, I'm trying to make sure I'm reading through all of these. Um, for organizations that are just getting started, what's one simple way they can begin bringing students into the design process? Oh, that is such a good question. I would say, and I hear the word simple, so that means maybe not a whole lot of moving parts, maybe not a super heavy lift. One simple way that you can begin bringing students into the design process is first hearing what their pain points are. A lot of times we focus on what is the adult pain point, what is the maybe educator, teacher, practitioner pain point. But if we hear from them first around what their pain point is, I think that's a great first start because now you have working knowledge directly from the student's mouth, where they're seeing needs, where they are seeing gaps, where they are seeing opportunities for refining a tool that maybe they are asked to use every day in the classroom. Maybe the teacher has implemented it. But if you hear from students first, I think that is one simple way to begin bringing in students into the design process. Now, I will say that that is step one, because step two would be taking the feedback that you hear, synthesizing it, and it might not be, a whole lot, but synthesizing it and sharing it back to that student group, what you've heard, how it is going to impact the roadmap, your roadmap, or maybe your UX experience. Sharing it back would be step two. But if we start with step one, we can get to step two. Let's see. Can you share a time when student feedback really changed the direction of a solution or product? What happened? Yes, that is a great question. And I have an on-time answer. We recently concluded one of our lowest cohorts where we had a student group partnered with an EdTech team who did wellness. It was a wellness kit. And they had a website that they were designing with a what do you call those people at the games, the mascots, with a mascot. And so they did this rapid cycle iteration where they asked students, what do you feel like is missing from this wellness toolkit? If you want to be encouraged, if you want to really amplify or step up maybe your wellness in any capacity, what do you feel like is missing? What is it that students your age need right now? And so students provided all of that feedback. And again, this is rapid cycle. This happened over 12 weeks. And each week, the product team would hear what it is the student had to say, take that feedback and think of ways to iterate it into their design, into the UX as well. And then at the end of the cycle, the students were able to see the completed platform with their ideas, their feedback embedded, right? And so a student said it would be really good if, and this was literally one of the students, it would be really good if, because we like achievement, if we could maybe get like a gold coin. And if we check in every day, we'll get X number of gold coins. And by the end of the week or the end of the month, we could use that to purchase merch. Well, the students saw at the end of the cycle that happened, that came to life. Another thing they said, which goes back to the quote from that EdTech developer who said, this precious idea I had, sometimes I had to step it to the side. The students were honest. They said, we don't really care for this mascot. It is not our style. It does not represent us. And so even the mascot was redesigned and they were able to provide iterative feedback on what the design features would be. And so at the end of it, the provider shared back this amazing thank you video, again, acknowledging the contributions of the students, their leadership, their student voice, and naming every feature that was integrated based off of what it is that the students had shared over the last 12 weeks. And so the students were excited about that. Right now, they're celebrities because they helped to create this app, this wellness app. So that is one way that students really help to change the direction of the product. Let me see time. Okay, we're good on time. Let me see any other questions. Okay, there's another question here. Once you've gathered student feedback, how do you let students know their ideas actually influence the final product or solution? Yes, good question. So I'll revisit this idea around transparency and accountability. Again, the first thing is that improvement tracker, because when it's in writing, students and the adult champions can see their feedback and they can see how it was implemented or not. But the most critical piece of that is communicating if something was not able to be done and why. And we completed last year a cycle with an ed tech team who they were doing like really quick, rapid cycle, right? And so maybe the first week they heard from the students and they just didn't have enough time by the time we got back to the students a week later to make the change. And so they communicated that to the students, hey, we still have it on our task list, but it's not something because of time constraints. We're not able to do it right now, but we have not thrown it away. We still recognize that it's a need that you have. And so being able to just be transparent and sharing that feedback is really important. So once you gather that, you can share that back however you choose to. We've had, I mentioned the EdTech team who did a video. We've had EdTech teams put together a slide deck. We've had EdTech teams do a wireframe to share back what changed, what could not. So again, different ways to get to the same solution. And I think those are all the questions. It looks like, yep. It looks like those are all the questions we have. We are good on time. And please feel free if you, oh, thank you. Please feel free to drop any other questions as I go through the this closing. And so I mentioned um, earlier a couple ways that you can elevate student voice, but I want to show this video as we close today. Then I come back, talk about Summer School 2026, some opportunities for you to connect with us further. And if there are any final questions, I'll be happy to answer those as well.
I'm a member of the League of Innovative Students cohort. It's been an amazing experience. I get a lot of support from the CII staff and how they develop different challenge maps, trying to see what kind of solutions we can make to overcome obstacles that may be hindering the students from completing their work or just being engaged in school. So there's a lot of opportunities for me to share my thoughts on what I'm looking at. It's a really inclusive space that allows me to just be a part of the conversation that usually adults tend to not include students in. So, it's great to just be a part of the conversation.
So I think that was a great way to end our time today. I won't hold you too much longer, but I do want to share with you this opportunity that we are inviting EdTech product solution developer teams to. It is our Collaborative by Design Summer School designed for EdTech innovators. If you are an EdTech leader, developer, a creator, bridging solution design, looking for real district impact, we invite you to, there's an interest form link that is in the chat. We invite you to sign up if it's something that you're interested in. This is a paid engagement that we're really excited about because this is going to really do some capacity building around how to engage with districts, what implementation looks like. We're going to dive deep into feedback loops as well. We'll do some strategizing around, if you were with us at the webinar one, we talked about the 5 whys, right? Getting to the root cause, not designing tools or products that address symptoms, but getting to the root cause and then mapping that back to impact. And so there's a lot we're going to do in the month of August. We would love to have you a part of that opportunity. And just real quick on the screen, your best product feedback is already in the classroom. We'll hit that a little bit. Designing for the room, not the demo. We'll hit that as well. And then building what districts actually need, then building it better. So we are excited about that. Maybe you're leaving today with questions that we weren't able to get answered, or you want to take a little more time to talk more thoughtfully around maybe a challenge you're facing or just a thought partner. feel free to grab this QR code on the screen or send me an email. I would be happy to set up some coffee chat time with you to talk and hopefully help co-design with you a solution to the problem that you might be having. So, that's all that I have for you today. I hope that you enjoyed this session. Thank you again so much for taking time out of your very busy day. And guess what? I'm going to gift you 8 minutes. Congratulations. Happy Wednesday. That is your gift for today. Thank you again. And I want to remind you that you will have access to these recordings on our YouTube page. And I look forward to seeing you at our summer school. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful afternoon.